I never thought I'd be sitting in the boardroom of Morgan and Reynolds Financial Group, watching my husband of 30 years walk in with complete shock on his face. 6 months earlier, he'd left our marriage for his 29-year-old secretary, claiming I wouldn't understand the corporate world and was too simple to be the wife of a CEO. Now, as the new majority shareholder of his precious company, I was about to prove just how wrong he was. But let me start from the beginning, because revenge isn't just a dish best served cold. It's a full-course meal that requires careful preparation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For 30 years, I was Catherine Morgan, devoted wife, dedicated mother, and the woman who everyone in Westbrook, Connecticut knew as Robert's wife. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Boston, the daughter of a school teacher and a mechanic. My parents valued hard work and education above all else, scraping together enough money to send me to college, where I studied accounting. That's where I met Robert. Back then, Robert Reynolds was just a business student with big dreams and endless charm. We met in the university library during finals week of my sophomore year. I was struggling with an advanced accounting problem when he sat down across from me, flashed that confident smile, and offered to help. He had this way about him, self-assured but never arrogant, ambitious but seemingly grounded. "You're looking at it too linearly," he said, pulling my textbook toward him. "Sometimes you need to approach a problem from an unexpected angle." I fell for those words and the man who spoke them. I didn't know then that 30 years later, he'd apply that same philosophy to our marriage. After graduation, we married in Dye, a small ceremony. My parents thought I was rushing, but I was certain. Robert had a vision for our future that seemed so clear, so attainable. He wanted to start his own financial consulting firm, and I believed in him completely. We moved into a tiny apartment in Hartford, where I took a job as a junior accountant at a local firm, while Robert networked and laid the groundwork for what would eventually become Morgan and Reynolds. Those early years were lean but happy. We budgeted carefully, saved aggressively, and spent our weekends planning our future on a second-hand couch with takeout Chinese food and dreams bigger than our apartment. I still remember how Robert would spread his business plans across our coffee table, eyes bright with determination. "Katie," he'd say, using the nickname only he was allowed to use, "one day we're going to have everything we've ever wanted. Trust me on this." And I did trust him, with my career, my future, my heart. When he asked me to quit my job to help him launch the business, I didn't hesitate. I became his first employee, handling the books, organizing client files, and even answering phones when we couldn't afford a receptionist. I worked alongside him for 14-hour days, 7 days a week, believing we were building something together. The first major client came 3 months in, a local manufacturing company looking for financial restructuring. Robert handled the client meetings while I prepared all the paperwork and financial models behind the scenes. When the deal closed successfully, Robert took me out to the nicest restaurant in town. "We did it, Katie," he said, raising his glass. "This is just the beginning." What I didn't notice was the subtle shift in his language. It wasn't "I did it" yet, but the "we" was already starting to fade. Success came quickly after that first client. Within 5 years, Morgan and Reynolds had grown from our 2-person operation to a team of 15, with offices in Hartford and Boston. I still managed the finances, but Robert began suggesting that perhaps I should focus on our home life. After all, we were planning to start a family, and the business was becoming more demanding. When I became pregnant with our first child, Emma, I reluctantly stepped back from daily operations. It wasn't what I wanted, but Robert insisted it was temporary. He hired a finance director to replace me, a Harvard MBA with an impressive resume and connections throughout New England's financial sector. "Just until Emma's in school," Robert promised. "Then you can come back if you still want to." Emma was followed by Michael 2 years later. By the time both children were in school, Morgan and Reynolds had grown to over 50 employees across 3 states. When I mentioned returning to the company, Robert gently redirected the conversation. "The business is different now, Katie. More complex. Besides, the children need stability at home, especially with how much I travel." And he did travel, increasingly, so as the years went on. Business trips that once lasted a day or two stretched into week-long absences. At first, there were apologetic phone calls and souvenirs for the children. Later, the calls became shorter, the explanations vaguer. I threw myself into being the perfect mother and wife. I joined the PTA, hosted dinner parties for Robert's clients and business partners, managed our expanding household, and never complained when he missed school recitals or family dinners. I believed I was supporting his dream. Our dream. Our 20th anniversary coincided with Morgan and Reynolds' expansion to Chicago. Instead of the romantic trip to Paris we'd been planning, Robert flew to Illinois to oversee the new office opening. He sent flowers and a card that his assistant had clearly purchased. I celebrated alone with a bottle of champagne and old photo albums, reminiscing about a partnership that I didn't realize was already dissolving. The children grew up, went to college, and started their own lives. Emma became a surgeon in Seattle, and Michael pursued his PhD in economics at Stanford. Our sprawling colonial house in Westbrook's most exclusive neighborhood felt increasingly empty, and I found myself with time I didn't know how to fill. I suggested rejoining the company numerous times. After all, I had an accounting degree and had been instrumental in building the business. But Robert always had a reason why it wouldn't work. The corporate culture had evolved, my skills were outdated. I would be uncomfortable in the fast-paced environment. "You've built such a beautiful life for us at home, Katie," he would say. "The company is my domain, and the home is yours. We each have our roles." So I accepted my role, even as it made me feel increasingly invisible. I redecorated our home, joined charity boards, took cooking classes, and scheduled my life around Robert's increasingly unpredictable calendar. When he was home, I made sure everything was perfect. His favorite meals prepared, the house immaculate, his shirts professionally pressed just the way he liked them. I didn't recognize how much I'd diminished myself until the day I overheard Robert on the phone in his home office. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the door was ajar, and something in his tone made me pause. "Melanie, you understand me in a way she never could," he said, his voice softer than it had been with me in years. "You see my vision. You're part of this world." I stood frozen outside that door, the laundry basket still in my hands, as the foundation of my life cracked beneath me. Melanie Parker, his executive assistant of 3 years, 29 years old with an MBA from Wharton, an ambition that apparently extended beyond the professional realm. I'd met her several times at company functions, where she'd been perfectly pleasant, even admiring. She'd complimented my charity work and asked for my pecan pie recipe after a company Thanksgiving event. I walked away quietly that day, put the laundry away, and made dinner as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted inside me. A slow awakening after decades of slumber. For the first time in years, I pulled out my old accounting textbooks and began updating my knowledge. I subscribed to financial journals and started following Morgan and Reynolds' public financial reports. If Robert noticed these changes, he didn't mention them. He was increasingly absent, both physically and emotionally. His explanations for late nights and weekend work became flimsier, and I stopped asking questions. Instead, I watched and waited, gathering information like a squirrel preparing for winter. 3 months later, Robert came home from a business trip to Miami with a suntan and guilt in his eyes. He sat me down in our expensively furnished living room, a room I'd decorated to his specifications years ago, and told me he wanted a divorce. "I've fallen in love with someone else, Catherine," he said, using my full name as if to create distance between us. I think we both know our marriage has run its course. You deserve to be happy, and so do I. He spoke as if he were doing me a favor, as if ending our 30-year marriage was an act of generosity on his part. It's Melanie, isn't it? I asked calmly. His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. She understands the business, Catherine. She's part of that world in a way you never wanted to be. I almost laughed at the absurdity of his statement. Never wanted to be? I'd been pushed out of that world, the world I helped create. I've been more than fair in the settlement offer, he continued, sliding a folder across the coffee table. The house, a generous monthly allowance, and your existing trust fund. My lawyer says it's more than reasonable given the circumstances, as if our 30 years together could be reduced to a legal footnote. I took the folder without opening it. I'll need time to review this with my own attorney. He seemed surprised by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. But something was hardening inside me. Not just anger or hurt, but resolve. For 30 years, I'd lived as Robert's wife. Now I would discover who Catherine Morgan really was. What Robert didn't know, what he had never bothered to ask, was that I'd been watching our finances carefully for years. I knew exactly what Morgan and Reynolds was worth, how it was structured, and where its vulnerabilities lay. And I knew something else, too. The company was facing a cash flow crisis that Robert had carefully hidden from investors. As he walked out of our home that evening, telling me he'd be staying at a hotel, though I knew exactly where he was going, I made a decision. I wouldn't just survive this betrayal. I would turn it into the opportunity I should have seized decades ago. Robert had taught me his most important business lesson without realizing it. Sometimes you need to approach a problem from an unexpected angle. And that's exactly what I plan to do. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The house felt different after Robert left. Quieter, but somehow less suffocating. I wandered from room to room that first night, looking at our life together through new eyes. The formal living room we rarely used. The kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of meals according to his preferences. The study where he'd made decision after decision without me. I slept in our bed that night, sprawled across his side for the first time in decades. When I woke the next morning, I didn't feel the crushing grief I'd expected. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Possibility. Before doing anything else, I needed professional help. Not a therapist, though that would come later. I needed a shark, someone who understood what I was up against. Diana Lawson was not what most people pictured when they thought of high-powered divorce attorneys. At 62, with her silver bob and grandmotherly cardigans, she looked more like a librarian than a woman who had taken 3 Fortune 500 executives to the cleaners. But her reputation in legal circles was legendary, and I needed a legend. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said when I entered her office, extending her hand. "Ms. Morgan," I corrected, reclaiming my maiden name for the first time in decades. "I'd like to go back to Morgan." Diana smiled, the kind of smile that showed she understood exactly what I was doing. "Very well, Ms. Morgan. Tell me everything." I did. I told her about building the company with Robert, about being gradually pushed aside, about discovering the affair, and about the insultingly simple divorce settlement he'd offered. "He thinks I'm just going to walk away with the house and an allowance," I said, sliding his offer across her desk. "Like I'm retiring from the position of wife with a gold watch and a pat on the head." Diana skimmed the document, her expression unchanging. But I noticed her eyes narrow slightly at the numbers. "This is indeed insulting," she said finally. "But before we discuss counteroffers, I need to understand what you want, Catherine. What's your endgame here?" I hadn't been asked what I wanted in so long that the question almost startled me. What did I want? Revenge? Yes, partly. Financial security? Of course. But as I sat in that office, I realized I wanted something more fundamental. I want what's rightfully mine, I said. I helped build Morgan and Reynolds. I want recognition for that. And I want Robert to understand exactly what he threw away. Diana studied me for a long moment, then nodded. We'll need to move quickly and quietly. Robert has almost certainly been planning this for months, maybe years. Men like him usually do. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, he's likely been shifting assets, downplaying the company's value, and preparing a strategy to minimize what you're entitled to. She leaned forward. Have you noticed any unusual financial activity? Large withdrawals? New accounts? I smiled for the first time since entering her office. I've handled our personal finances for 30 years. Nothing happens without me knowing about it. Diana raised an eyebrow, impressed. That's unusual. Most men in Robert's position take control of the money early on. Robert considers personal finances beneath him, I explained. Too mundane for a financial genius. He sets the broad strokes, investments, major purchases, but day-to-day banking? That's household management. His oversight may be our advantage, Diana said. But we'll still need a forensic accountant to examine the business financials. Corporate structures can hide significant assets. I've already started, I admitted, pulling out a folder of my own. These are Morgan and Reynolds' public filings for the past 5 years. I've highlighted some discrepancies that caught my attention. Diana took the folder, genuine surprise registering on her face as she flipped through my notations. Most clients come to me in tears, not with financial analysis. I've had 3 months to prepare since I first heard him on the phone with her, I said. I'm done crying. After our meeting, I drove to the bank, not our regular branch where the tellers knew me as Mrs. Reynolds, but to the main office downtown. I asked to speak with the bank president, Marcus Daniels. Robert played golf with Marcus occasionally, but I knew him through my work with the Children's Hospital Foundation Board. Catherine, Marcus greeted me warmly in his office. What brings you in today? Is Robert with you? I'm here on my own, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice light. I need to access our safe deposit box. There are some family documents I need to review. If Marcus found this unusual, he didn't show it. He personally escorted me to the vault and left me alone with the large metal box that contained our most important papers. Inside, I found exactly what I was looking for, the original partnership agreement for Morgan and Reynolds. Robert had insisted, we keep it here rather than with our regular documents at home. Now I understood why. The agreement, dated nearly 30 years ago, listed both of us as founding partners, with a 60-40 split in Robert's favor. More importantly, there was no clause removing me as a partner when I stepped back from active management. According to this document, I still owned 40% of the original company. Of course, the company had restructured multiple times since then. There had been new investors, new partnerships, and eventually, a conversion to a privately held corporation. Robert had handled all those transitions, bringing me papers to sign that I had trusted him to explain accurately. I took photos of every page of the partnership agreement and several other key documents, then carefully returned everything exactly as I had found it. Robert couldn't know I was gathering ammunition. That evening, as I sat alone in our kitchen, my phone rang. It was Emma, our daughter. Mom? Her voice was tight with anger. Dad just called me. How are you? Why didn't you tell me what was happening? I'm still processing it myself, sweetheart, I said, wishing I could shield her from this mess. I didn't want to upset you during your surgical rotation. Well, I'm upset now, she said. He's leaving you for his assistant? It's like some midlife crisis cliché. I told him exactly what I thought about it. I couldn't help but smile at my daughter's fierce loyalty. What did he say? He gave me some garbage about how you two had grown apart, How this Melanie person understands him intellectually. Can you believe that? As if you haven't been his backbone for 30 years. She paused. I'm flying home this weekend. You don't have to do that. I want to, Mom. Michael's coming too. We've already booked our flights. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of the kitchen, thinking about my children. They were adults now, with their own lives and perspectives. They would see this situation through different eyes than I did. Emma, always protective, would be angry on my behalf. Michael, more analytical, would want to understand the practical implications. Neither of them knew about my plans yet. I wasn't sure they would approve. The next day, I met with Diana and her recommended forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Valerie Chen. I brought the photos of the partnership agreement and everything else I had gathered. This is extremely helpful, Valerie said, examining the documents. But we need more. Current corporate structure, recent financial reports, loan agreements. Without those, we're working blind. Robert keeps all of that at his office or on his secured laptop, I said. I don't have access. Diana and Valerie exchanged looks. What? I asked. There might be another way, Diana said carefully. But it's not without risk. She explained that during divorce proceedings, I would have legal right to full financial disclosure. However, by then, important documents might conveniently disappear or be altered. The strongest position would be if we already had evidence. Before formal proceedings begin, she said, is there any way you could access his home office, his computer? I thought about the passwords I knew, about Robert's habit of leaving his laptop on his desk when he came home for a change of clothes, about the digital trail that existed somewhere in our shared life. I might be able to, I said slowly, but I need to be careful. If he suspects anything, he'll lock everything down. That night, I received a text from Robert saying he needed to stop by the house to pick up some files from his study. I texted back that I would be out at a charity committee meeting and he was welcome to come by. Then I called the committee chair and made my excuses, and instead, I waited in my car down the street, watching our house. Sure enough, at exactly 7 o'clock, Robert's Tesla pulled into the driveway. 10 minutes later, Melanie's Audi joined it. They were in the house, my house, for almost an hour. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, imagining them laughing together in the space I had created, perhaps even planning their future in the home I had made. When they finally left, I waited another 15 minutes before returning home. I went straight to Robert's study and looked around carefully. What had they taken? What had they been looking for? The filing cabinet where Robert kept his important papers was slightly ajar. I opened it and immediately noticed several folders missing, the ones containing our estate plans and investment portfolios. But he had overlooked something, a thumb drive labeled M&R Backup 2023 that had fallen behind the cabinet. I picked it up, my heart racing. This might be nothing, or it might be everything. I plugged it into my laptop, and after a tense moment while the drive loaded, I found myself looking at hundreds of Morgan & Reynolds files, corporate tax returns, board, minutes, loan documents, and most importantly, shareholder agreements. It was a complete backup of the company's corporate records, likely created before Robert's last laptop upgrade. It was more than I had dared hope for. A roadmap to the company Robert thought I was too simple to understand. As I scrolled through, document after document, a plan began to form in my mind. I had discovered something significant. Morgan & Reynolds was in trouble. Behind the gleaming success story lay a company overextended on several major investments, with a dangerous cash flow problem looming. Robert needed an infusion of capital, quickly and quietly, and according to these files, he was planning to secure it by selling shares to a private equity firm at a fraction of their true value, diluting all existing shareholders in the process, including me. if I indeed still held shares as the original partnership agreement suggested. I picked up my phone and called Diana. "I think I've found exactly what we need," I said, "and I know what I want to do next." "What's that?" she asked. "I'm going to buy my husband's company right out from under him." "This is much worse than it looks on the surface," Valerie Chen said, spreading the documents from Robert's thumb drive across Diana's conference table. "Morgan and Reynolds has been using aggressive accounting practices for years." It was Saturday morning, and I'd spent the past 2 days combing through the files with Diana's team. Emma and Michael were arriving that evening, and I needed answers before I faced them. "Define aggressive," I asked. Valerie pointed to several highlighted sections. "They've been booking projected revenue as current income, overvaluing assets, and hiding liabilities in subsidiary companies. It's all technically legal, but it's designed to make the company look more profitable than it actually is." "Is the company insolvent?" Diana asked, the concern evident in her voice. "Not yet," Valerie replied. "But they're heading for a serious cash crunch in about 3 months. That's why Robert's rushing to sell shares to Pinnacle Partners." Pinnacle Partners was a private equity firm known for swooping in on troubled companies, injecting capital, cutting staff to the bone, and flipping the restructured businesses for profit. According to the documents, they were offering to buy 30% of Morgan and Reynolds at what Valerie called distress pricing. "Robert needs this deal," Valerie continued. "Without it, he'll have to admit to his board and clients that the company isn't as stable as he's claimed. And in divorce proceedings, he'd have to admit the company is worth less than he's been representing," Diana added. "Which is likely why he's offering you such a clean break. The house, the allowance, no company involvement. He's trying to isolate you from discovering the truth." I stared at the spreadsheets and contracts spread before me. For years, Robert had acted as if I couldn't possibly understand his sophisticated financial world. Now I realized he'd been counting on my ignorance. "What about my ownership stake?" I asked. "The original partnership agreement is unfortunately superseded by later corporate restructuring," Diana said gently. "But not entirely. Based on our preliminary analysis, you still own approximately 15% of the company through the family trust Robert established 10 years ago." "He never mentioned that," I said, surprised. Diana smiled thinly. "It was likely a tax strategy. The trust owns the shares, and both you and Robert are trustees. He probably assumed he could control all decisions. But as a trustee, I have equal authority," I said, beginning to understand. "Exactly," Diana confirmed. "And more importantly, the trust agreement has an unusual clause. In the event of divorce, the trustees must act unanimously, or else the trust's voting rights are suspended until the divorce is finalized." I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. "So Robert can't vote those shares without my agreement?" "And neither can you," Valerie pointed out. "But that 15% could be the swing vote in any major company decision," I said slowly, "like selling shares to Pinnacle Partners." Diana nodded. "The board would need a supermajority to approve such a significant transaction. Without the trust's shares, they might not have it." "So I could block the Pinnacle deal," I said, the implications becoming clear. "You could," Diana agreed. "But blocking the deal without an alternative would just accelerate the company's cash flow problem. Robert would find another solution, possibly one that dilutes your ownership even further." I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Robert had always loved this view, the concrete testament to business and ambition. I had preferred our garden view at home, or so he'd always assumed. In reality, I'd just stopped expressing opinions he didn't value. "What if I offered an alternative?" I asked, turning back to face them. Diana and Valerie exchanged glances. "What kind of alternative?" Diana asked carefully. "What if I found investors to inject the needed capital instead of Pinnacle?" Valerie looked skeptical. You would need at least $30 million based on these projections, and you'd need it within weeks. I thought of the network I'd built over decades, of charity work, board memberships, and community involvement, connections Robert had always dismissed as social fluff. I know people, I said simply. That evening, Emma and Michael arrived at the house. Seeing them walk through the door together, their faces set with matching expressions of concern and indignation, brought the first real tears I'd shed since Robert left. After hugs and reassurances, we settled in the kitchen, always the heart of our family gatherings. "So he's really going through with this?" Michael asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He's throwing away 30 years for his assistant?" "Executive assistant," Emma corrected with biting sarcasm. "She has an MBA, you know. Dad made sure to point that out to me, as if that makes her stealing someone's husband more respectable." I reached across the table and took each of their hands. "I need you both to understand something. This isn't just happening to me. I'm making choices. Too, I'm not a victim in this story." They looked at me quizzically. "What do you mean, Mom?" Emma asked. I took a deep breath. It was time to trust them with at least part of the truth. "Your father's company is in financial trouble," I said. "He's been hiding it. But it's serious, and I'm considering getting involved." Michael, with his economist's mind, immediately grasped the implications. "Involved how? You haven't been active in the company for decades." "That doesn't mean I don't understand it," I replied, more sharply than I intended. "I built that company alongside your father. I know its foundations better than anyone." Emma leaned forward. "Mom, are you saying you want to go back to work? At Morgan and Reynolds? With Dad and her?" I shook my head. "Not exactly, but I do have options regarding my ownership stake. Options that could determine the company's future." I explained about the family trust and the shares it controlled, careful not to reveal my full plan. I wasn't ready to share that, not even with my children. "So you could block Dad's deal with this private equity firm?" Michael asked, his analyst's mind already calculating the angles. "I could," I confirmed. "But that's not necessarily the right move for the company or its employees." "Who cares what's right for the company?" Emma said fiercely. "Dad betrayed you. Why should you protect his business?" I studied my daughter, so brilliant in her field, so black and white in her personal judgments. "Because there are 400 people who work there who had nothing to do with your father's choices. And because part of that company is mine. I don't walk away from what's mine." Michael was watching me with new eyes. "You have a plan," he said. It wasn't a question. I smiled. "I'm developing one." Later that night, after Emma and Michael had gone to bed, I sat in the kitchen with my laptop, composing an email to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Garrett Wilson. Garrett had been Robert's best friend in college, his roommate, and almost his business partner. But they'd had a falling out just before the launch of Morgan and Reynolds. Robert claimed it was because Garrett lacked vision. Garrett maintained it was because Robert cut him out after using his ideas. Whatever the truth, Garrett had gone on to build Wilson Capital Partners, a boutique investment firm that specialized in turning around underperforming financial services companies. He was exactly the person I needed, someone who understood both finance and Robert. My email was simple. "Garrett, it's been too long. I find myself in need of your particular expertise. Could we meet for coffee on Monday? Catherine Morgan, formerly Reynolds." His reply came within minutes, despite the late hour. "Catherine, I've been following the business news. Coffee sounds inadequate for what I suspect you're facing. How about lunch at the Capitol Grill at 1 p.m.? Some conversations are better had over steak." Garrett, I typed back my acceptance, then closed my laptop. For the first time since discovering Robert's betrayal, I felt something like excitement stirring in my chest. Sunday passed in a blur of family time with Emma and Michael. We deliberately avoided talk of Robert or the company, instead reminiscing. about family vacations and sharing updates on their lives. It was a welcome respite from strategizing, a reminder of what really mattered. Monday morning, I drove Emma and Michael to the airport, promising to keep them updated. Then I went home to prepare for my lunch with Garrett. I stood in my closet, surveying the rows of expensive conservative clothes Robert had always approved of, tailored but understated, elegant but not attention-grabbing. At the back hung a crimson sheath dress I'd bought on impulse years ago, but never worn because Robert had commented that it was a bit much for someone your age. I pulled it out and slipped it on. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow, not younger, but more present, more vivid. I added a gold statement necklace Emma had given me for Christmas, a pair of heels higher than I usually wore, and applied makeup with a heavier hand than usual. The Capitol Grill was one of Hartford's power, lunch spots frequented by the same executives and financiers who had always seen me as merely Robert's wife. As I walked through the restaurant, I felt eyes tracking me, registering the change, reassessing. Garrett rose from a corner table as I approached. At 60, he looked fit and sharp, his silver hair lending him an air of distinguished experience. His smile was genuine as he took my hand. "Catherine," he said warmly, "you look remarkable." "It's been a long time, Garrett," I replied, taking the seat the waiter held for me. 28 years, he said. "Not that I'm counting." Once we'd ordered, Garrett leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "I've heard rumors about Morgan and Reynolds," he said without preamble. "Cash flow problems, an emergency deal with Pinnacle Partners, and of course the more personal rumors about Robert and his assistant." "Executive assistant," I corrected with a small smile, echoing Emma's sarcasm. Garrett shook his head. "Some things never change. Robert always did think he was the smartest person in any room." "Not smart enough, as it turns out," I said. "His company is in trouble, and he doesn't realize I know." Garrett's eyes sparked with interest. "And you're considering getting involved?" I took a sip of water, considering how much to reveal. Then I decided to trust my instincts. "I'm considering taking control," I said. A slow smile spread across Garrett's face. "Now that," he said, raising his water glass in a toast, "is a conversation worth having over steak." "Your timing couldn't be better," Garrett said, cutting into his steak. "Morgan and Reynolds is vulnerable in ways that Robert doesn't want anyone to know about." We were seated in the farthest corner of the Capitol Grill, voices hushed despite the ambient noise that made eavesdropping nearly impossible. "How do you know that?" I asked. Garrett's smile was sharp. "Hartford's financial world is smaller than Robert likes to think. 2 of his regional managers approached Wilson Capital about positions last month. They didn't say it explicitly, but reading between the lines, they're jumping ship because they see warning signs." I nodded, unsurprised. "The company's overextended on 3 major investments that aren't performing. They're facing a significant cash shortfall within 90 days. Garrett's eyebrows rose. "You've done your homework." "I've had access to Robert's backup files," I said simply. "But there's more. The Pinnacle Partners deal he's pursuing would give them effective control of the company's direction. They'd keep Robert as the public face, but his authority would be severely limited." "Does he know that?" I shook my head. "I don't think so. The terms are buried in the fine print of a 60-page agreement. Robert always did hate reading the details." "And you didn't," Garrett observed. "No," I agreed. "I didn't." Garrett set down his fork and studied me with new appreciation. "So what exactly are you proposing, Catherine?" I laid out my thinking. I needed to assemble an investment group to offer an alternative to the Pinnacle deal, one that would provide the necessary capital without taking control away from existing shareholders. My 15% stake through the family trust could be the linchpin, especially if I could convince other key shareholders to align with me. "It's ambitious," Garrett said when I finished. "You'd need significant capital commitments within weeks, and you'd need to operate completely under Robert's radar until you're ready to move." Can it be done? Garrett considered for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. It would be unorthodox, but I think Wilson Capital could help structure this. We have clients looking for exactly this kind of opportunity. Troubled assets with strong fundamentals. And Morgan & Reynolds does have strong fundamentals, I confirmed. Robert's a terrible manager, but he built a good business model. The core operations are sound. It's the expansion that's been mishandled. Garrett nodded. That's exactly the sort of situation my firm specializes in. But Catherine, you need to understand what you're getting into. If we do this, you'll be directly opposing Robert in a very public way. I'm counting on it, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. A slow smile spread across Garrett's face. You know, I always thought Robert underestimated you. Now I'm realizing just how much. Over dessert, we outlined next steps. Garrett would discreetly approach potential investors while I gathered more intelligence on Robert's plans and the company's current operations. We agreed to communicate only through encrypted messages and to meet in person whenever possible to avoid creating an electronic trail. As we parted outside the restaurant, Garrett hesitated. There's something else you should know, he said, his expression growing serious. Robert's been shopping his personal shares to private buyers. It's not widely known, but he's offered substantial blocks to at least 3 different investors in the past month. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. If he's trying to maintain control— Exactly, Garrett cut in. It's inconsistent with his public stance. Either he's more desperate for cash than the company documents suggest, or he's planning to cash out entirely once the Pinnacle deal closes, I finished, the implications suddenly clear. He's not fighting for his company's future. He's arranging his own golden parachute. It would be consistent with his pattern, Garrett said quietly. Robert always did prioritize his own interests. I thought about that revelation as I drove home, anger simmering beneath my composed exterior. Robert wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying the company we'd built together, the employees who trusted him, the clients who believed in Morgan & Reynolds' stability. All for what? A comfortable exit with his younger girlfriend? When I arrived home, there was an unfamiliar car in the driveway, a sleek black BMW I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered driving past, but this was still my home. I wouldn't be intimidated. As I entered the house, I heard voices from the kitchen. One was Robert's. The other, higher and with a slight vocal fry, could only belong to Melanie. Set my purse down deliberately loudly and walked toward the kitchen. They were standing together by the island, Robert pouring wine into 2 glasses from a bottle I'd been saving for Emma's next visit. They both looked up as I entered, Robert's expression flickering between annoyance and guilt, Melanie's carefully composed into professional politeness. Catherine? Robert said, sounding irritated at the interruption. I thought you'd be out. Today? It's my house, I replied calmly. Why would I stay away from it? Melanie shifted uncomfortably, her hand moving almost imperceptibly closer to Robert's on the countertop. We needed to pick up some documents for tomorrow's board meeting, Robert explained, gesturing to a stack of folders on the island. I texted, You? I checked my phone. There was indeed a message from Robert, sent 20 minutes ago, clearly after they'd already arrived. I see, I said, putting my phone away. And the wine? Is that also for the board meeting? Robert had the grace to look embarrassed. We were just— Please, I cut him off. Don't insult my intelligence. At least have the decency to take my wine to a hotel if you're going to drink it together. Melanie suddenly straightened, her professional mask slipping. Robert, we should go. We have dinner reservations. I caught the flash of a large diamond on her left hand as she reached for the folders. An engagement ring. They were already engaged, barely a week after Robert had asked for a divorce. My suspicions about how long this had been planned crystallized into certainty. Congratulations seem to be in order, I said, nodding toward the ring. Robert's face paled. Catherine? When's the wedding? I asked, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. Or are you waiting for the divorce to be finalized? That would be the proper thing to do, after all. This isn't how I wanted you to find out, Robert began, but Melanie interrupted him. We're thinking September, she said, a hint of defiance in her tone. A small ceremony in Nantucket, just close friends and family. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. She was beautiful in a polished, calculated way, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She wore a cream, silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, and tailored slacks that highlighted her gym-toned figure. She looked exactly like the type of woman Robert would think he deserved. Young, ambitious, and very much a reflection of his own carefully cultivated image. September, I repeated. How convenient. Our divorce should be final by then, assuming we reach a settlement quickly. Robert cleared his throat. About that, have you had a chance to review the offer? My lawyer was hoping to hear from yours this week. I marveled at his audacity, standing in my kitchen with his new fiancée, drinking my wine, and asking about divorce proceedings as if we were discussing a minor business transaction. My lawyer will be in touch, I said neutrally. There are some aspects of the proposal that require further discussion. Robert frowned. Catherine, I thought we agreed to keep this simple. The offer is more than generous. Is it? I asked. I suppose that depends on how you value 30 years of partnership. Melanie shifted again, visibly uncomfortable. I'll wait in the car, she murmured to Robert, gathering the folders and her purse. Once she'd left, Robert's demeanor changed. The polite facade dropped, replaced by barely contained impatience. What do you want, Catherine? He demanded. The house? Fine, it's yours. A larger monthly allowance? We can negotiate that. But don't drag this out thinking you can punish me, or change my mind. I studied the man I'd been married to for 3 decades, trying to reconcile him with the ambitious young business student I'd fallen in love with. Had he always been this dismissive, this condescending? Or had success simply revealed what was always beneath the surface? I want what I'm entitled to, Robert, I said calmly. Nothing more, nothing less. And what do you think you're entitled to? He scoffed. You haven't been involved with the company in decades. I smiled thinly. That's where you're wrong. I've been more involved than you realize, and I'm still a trustee of the family trust that owns 15% of Morgan & Reynolds. His expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. That's a technicality. The trust was set up for tax purposes. Nevertheless, I interrupted, as a trustee, I have equal say in how those shares are voted, including on any proposed deal with Pinnacle Partners. Robert went very still. How do you know about Pinnacle? I know a great many things, Robert, including the fact that Morgan & Reynolds is facing a cash crisis that you've been hiding from the board and shareholders. Color drained from his face. You've been going through my files, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I've been protecting my interests, I corrected. Something you taught me to do, though you never thought I was paying attention. Robert's hands clenched on the counter. If you interfere with the Pinnacle deal, you'll be cutting off your nose to spite your face. That deal is the only thing standing between the company and potential bankruptcy. Is that what you've told the board, or have you presented it as a strategic growth opportunity? His silence was answer enough. I thought so, I said. Don't worry, Robert. I have no intention of letting Morgan & Reynolds fail, but I may have different ideas about how to save it. He studied me with new wariness. What are you planning? You'll find out soon enough, I replied, picking up my purse. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like some time alone in my house. Please take your fiancée and her ring somewhere else to celebrate. After Robert left, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Diana. Robert knows I'm aware of the Pinnacle deal, I told her without preamble. And he knows I understand my rights regarding the family trust. How did that happen? She asked, alarm evident in her voice. He was at the house with Melanie when I got home. They're engaged, by the way, planning a September wedding. Diana swore softly. That complicates things. If he suspects you're gathering information, he'll accelerate his plans, I finished. Which means we need to accelerate ours. Are you sure about this, Catherine? Once we move forward, there's no going back. I thought about Robert and Melanie standing in my kitchen, about the diamond on her finger, about 30 years reduced to a generous settlement offer. I'm sure, I said firmly. It's time Robert learned exactly who he's been underestimating all these years. The pinnacle vote has been moved up, Garrett said without preamble when I answered his call the next morning. Robert's called an emergency board meeting for next Friday. I gripped the phone tighter. That's 10 days away. Can he do that? As CEO and chairman, yes. He's citing urgent financial considerations that require immediate action. I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing this new challenge. He's accelerating because of our conversation. Yesterday, he knows I might try to block the deal. Most likely, Garrett agreed. Which means we need to move faster than we planned. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? There's someone I want you to talk to. Wilson Capital occupied the top floor of a sleek glass tower downtown, its reception area understated in a way that suggested true wealth, the kind that doesn't need to advertise itself. As the elevator doors opened, I found Garrett waiting, his expression serious but energized. This way, he said, leading me down a hallway lined with black and white photographs of historic Hartford. She just flew in from Boston. Who did? I asked, but my question was answered as we entered a spacious corner conference room. A woman stood gazing out the window, her back to us. She turned as we entered, and I recognized her immediately. Eliza Montgomery, founder and CEO of Montgomery Ventures, one of the most successful female-led investment firms in New England. Catherine, she said warmly, extending her hand. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Garrett speaks very highly of your business acumen. I shook her hand, momentarily speechless. Eliza Montgomery was a legend in financial circles, known for her shrewd investments and for breaking through Wall Street's glass ceiling in the 1990s. Now, in her 60s, she projected an aura of confident authority that I immediately admired. Montgomery, I managed. This is unexpected. Eliza, please, she said with a smile. And it shouldn't be that unexpected. Women who've been underestimated by men like Robert Reynolds tend to recognize each other. Garrett gestured for us to sit. Eliza and I have known each other for 15 years. When I described your situation, she was particularly interested. Eliza nodded. Morgan and Reynolds has been on my radar for some time. Their client portfolio is impressive despite their cash flow issues, and their female client base is substantial, an underserved demographic in financial services. You've been researching the company? I asked. I research everything, she replied simply. It's how I've stayed ahead in this business. And when Garrett mentioned your connection to Morgan and Reynolds, I saw an opportunity that aligned with my firm's investment strategy. Over the next hour, Eliza outlined her proposal. Montgomery Ventures would anchor our investment group, committing $20 million toward the capital injection Morgan and Reynolds needed. In exchange, they wanted board representation and a partnership to develop financial products specifically targeted to female investors. Your company has the infrastructure and client base we want to access, Eliza explained. What they lack is vision regarding the fastest-growing segment of the wealth management market, women. Robert never saw the potential there, I admitted. He still thinks of financial decisions as primarily made by men, despite all evidence to the contrary. His blind spot is our advantage, Eliza said with a knowing smile. I've reviewed the information Garrett shared. With your 15% stake through the family trust, plus Montgomery Ventures investment, we'd have significant influence. possibly enough to block the Pinnacle deal if we can convince just one or two other board members to join us. The challenge is identifying which board members might be sympathetic, Garrett added. Robert has stacked the board with allies over the years. I thought about the people Robert had appointed to the Morgan and Reynolds board, primarily older men from his club, with a few token women chosen more for their connections than their financial expertise. But there was one exception. James Chen, I said. Valerie's father. Garrett looked surprised. The retired professor? I didn't realize he was on the board. Robert appointed him 3 years ago, mostly as a PR move to show diversity, I explained. James was one of Robert's professors in college, and Robert has always respected his opinion. More importantly, James believes in corporate governance. If he knew the true state of the company and the implications of the Pinnacle deal, he might be persuaded to vote with us, Eliza finished. Can you arrange a meeting? I nodded. I've known James for years. He and his wife attend my annual Christmas party. I can reach out to him. Good, Eliza said decisively. Now, there's the matter of your personal stake in this, Catherine. What exactly do you want? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Revenge against Robert? Control of the company? Financial security? I want recognition for my role in building Morgan and Reynolds, I said finally. I want a seat at the table I helped create. And yes, I want Robert to face consequences for his choices, both personal and professional. Eliza studied me for a long moment. Revenge is an understandable motivation, but it's not a sustainable business strategy. If we're going to do this, I need to know you're committed to the company's future, not just to settling scores with your ex-husband. Her directness was refreshing after years of Robert's manipulative communication. The company has potential that Robert has never fully realized, I said, particularly in serving female clients and in developing the next generation of financial advisors. I have ideas that Robert dismissed years ago that are even more relevant today. Such as, Eliza prompted, a dedicated division focused on women in transition, divorce, widowhood, inheritance, financial education programs for young professionals, specialized services for female entrepreneurs and executives. Morgan and Reynolds has the infrastructure to implement all of these, but Robert has always focused on traditional high net worth clients, primarily men. Eliza's expression warmed with interest. Those are exactly the kind of initiatives Montgomery Ventures supports. I think we have the basis for a partnership, Catherine. As we wrapped up the meeting, Garrett outlined our next steps. I would approach James Chen while he worked on securing additional investors. Eliza would prepare a formal proposal outlining Montgomery Ventures' investment terms. We would reconvene in 3 days to finalize our strategy before the board meeting. One more thing, Eliza said as we prepared to leave. Your divorce proceedings. They'll become complicated once we make our move. Are you prepared for that? Diana Lawson is handling my divorce, I replied. She's aware of our plans and is prepared for Robert's reaction. Eliza nodded approvingly. Diana's reputation precedes her. You've chosen your allies well. As I left Wilson Capital, my phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Need your signature on some trust documents. My lawyer's office tomorrow 2 p.m. Standard. Administrative matter. I showed the message to Garrett, who was walking me to my car. There's nothing standard about this, he said grimly. He's trying to get you to sign control of the trust to him before the board meeting. He must be desperate, I observed. This is clumsy, even for Robert. Desperation makes people predictable, Garrett replied, which works to our advantage. I texted back to Robert. Sorry, not available tomorrow. Have Diana send the documents to my lawyer for review. His response was immediate. This can't wait. It's time sensitive. I smiled at his transparent urgency and didn't respond further. That evening, I called James Chen. After exchanging pleasantries, I carefully steered the conversation toward Morgan and Reynolds. James, I said, I know you serve on the board, and I need your advice on something sensitive. Could we meet for coffee tomorrow? He agreed immediately, his voice warm with concern. Of course, Catherine. The news about you and Robert. I was very sorry to hear it. Thank you, I said. But this is about more than my marriage. It's about the company's future. The next morning, I met James at a quiet cafe far from the financial district where Robert and his colleagues typically dined. At 70, James Chen retained the sharp mind and direct gaze that had made him a formidable professor. He listened carefully as I outlined what I had discovered about Morgan and Reynolds's financial situation and the real implications of the Pinnacle deal. I suspected something wasn't right, he said when I finished. At the last board meeting, Robert rushed through the quarterly financials and deflected questions about the Chicago expansion. But I had no idea the situation was this serious. Few people do, I said. Robert has been very careful about controlling the narrative. James frowned. As a board member, I have a fiduciary duty to act in the company's best interest. If what you're telling me is accurate, the Pinnacle deal might save the company from immediate cash flow problems, but at the cost of its independence and long-term vision. Exactly, I confirmed. And there's an alternative. I've been working with investors who are prepared to provide the necessary capital without taking control from current shareholders. But we need board support. James studied me with new respect. You've been busy, Catherine. I always told Robert he underestimated you. Most men do, I said with a small smile. What role do you see for yourself in this alternative scenario? He asked perceptively. A seat on the board at minimum, I replied, and a role in developing new initiatives focused on female clients. James nodded slowly. Both reasonable requests, given your history with the company and your ownership stake. He paused, weighing his words carefully. You should know that Robert has been telling the board that you're acting emotionally due to the divorce, that your interference is purely vindictive. I had expected as much. And what do you think, James? I think you've presented a more comprehensive understanding of our financial situation than Robert has, he said diplomatically. And I think the board deserves to hear all options before voting on something as significant as the Pinnacle deal. Will you help ensure they get that chance? I asked. James considered for a long moment, then nodded. I'll need to see the details of your alternative proposal, and I'll need verification of the financial information you've shared. But if everything checks out, yes, I'll support bringing your proposal to the full board. As we parted, James clasped my hand warmly. For what it's worth, Catherine, I always thought you were the backbone of that company in the early days. Robert may have been the face, but you were the foundation. His words stayed with me as I drove to Diana's office to update her on our progress. For the first time since Robert had asked for a divorce, I felt not just determined, but truly confident. With Eliza Montgomery's resources, Garrett's strategic guidance, and now James Chen's support, we had a real chance of succeeding. Robert had spent years dismissing my contributions and underestimating my abilities. Now he was about to discover just how expensive that mistake would be. 3 days before the board meeting, Robert's lawyer called Diana. He's offering to increase the settlement by 25%, Diana reported after the call. In exchange, he wants you to sign over your voting rights in the family trust. Immediately, I laughed without humor. He's getting desperate. Extremely, Diana agreed. This is the third offer increase in a week. He claims it's to expedite an amicable resolution, but the timing is transparent. What did you tell him? That you're still considering your options and will respond in due course. Diana's tone was professional, but couldn't quite mask her satisfaction. I mentioned we might need to conduct further discovery regarding the company's financials before making any decisions. How did he react to that? His lawyer stammered something about respecting your privacy during this difficult time and not dragging things out unnecessarily. Diana smiled thinly. Translation: Robert is panicking. After leaving Diana's office, I drove to Wilson Capital for our final strategy meeting before the board vote. Garrett and Eliza were waiting in the conference room, along with two new faces, Valerie Chen and a sharp-looking man in his 40s whom Garrett introduced as Taylor Novak, Morgan and Reynolds' former CFO. Taylor left the company last year, Garrett explained. He can provide insight into the board dynamics and the company's true financial situation. Taylor nodded grimly. I resigned when Robert ignored my warnings about the Chicago expansion. He insisted on pushing forward despite clear indicators that the market wouldn't support it. Why didn't you take your concerns to the board? I asked. I tried, Taylor said. Robert scheduled my presentation for the end of a 6-hour meeting, then cut my time from 30 minutes to 5. Classic Robert technique. Bury unwelcome information under administrative details when everyone's too tired to ask questions. I nodded, all too familiar with Robert's tactics. Why are you willing to help us now? Taylor exchanged glances with Valerie. Let's just say I have personal and professional reasons to want to see Robert Reynolds held accountable. Something in his expression suggested there was more to the story, but now wasn't the time to press for details. Eliza took charge of the meeting, outlining our current position. We've secured commitment letters for the full $30 million. Montgomery Ventures is in for $20 million, with Wilson Capital and other investors covering the rest. James Chen has reviewed our proposal and is prepared to support bringing it to a vote at the board meeting. What about the other board members? I asked. Taylor pulled up a slide showing photos of the 9 Morgan and Reynolds board members with notes beside each name. Robert controls 4 votes directly, he explained. His college roommate Thomas Ford, his brother-in-law William Patterson, his golf buddy Gerald McKenzie, and Melanie Parker, whom he appointed to the board 2 months ago. That last detail was new information. He put Melanie on the board? I asked, incredulous. That's blatantly inappropriate. He cleared it with legal first, Taylor said. Since they weren't officially engaged at the time and she technically qualifies due to her MBA and position as executive VP, ethics couldn't block it. I shook my head at Robert's audacity. Continue. James Chen will vote with us, Taylor went on. That leaves 3 swing votes, Patricia Hammond, Jeffrey Nelson, and Diane Wilcox. I knew all 3. Patricia was CEO of a regional hospital system and the most independent-minded of the group. Jeffrey was old Hartford money, conservative but principled. Diane had been a partner at a major accounting firm before retirement and had always been cordial to me at company events. I've already spoken with Patricia, Eliza said. She's concerned about the company's direction and receptive to alternatives to the Pinnacle deal. She's reviewing our proposal now. Jeffrey follows Patricia's lead on financial matters, I noted. If she's with us, he likely will be too. That leaves Diane as the deciding vote, Garrett observed. I know her socially, I said. We've served on several charity boards together over the years. Can you approach her? Eliza asked. I considered this carefully. Yes, but we need to be strategic. If Robert gets wind that we're lobbying board members, he might take drastic measures to prevent a fair vote. What kind of measures? Valerie asked, looking concerned. Postponing the meeting, changing the rules for bringing alternative proposals to the floor, maybe even attempting to remove James from the board on some manufactured pretext, Taylor suggested. I've seen him pull similar maneuvers before. Our best approach is stealth and timing, Garrett said. We need to appear vulnerable and reactive until the last possible moment, then strike decisively. A strategy I believe Robert taught you, I said with a small smile. Garrett nodded, returning the smile. He was a good teacher. I'll give him that. Speaking of Robert, Eliza said, his legal team contacted my office this morning. Apparently, they've caught wind that Montgomery Ventures is looking at Morgan and Reynolds. They invited me to meet with Robert to discuss potential synergies. This was unexpected. What did you tell them? That I'm traveling until next week, but would be happy to schedule something after that, Eliza replied. I wanted to keep our options open while giving us time to execute our plan. Good, I said. The less Robert knows about our preparations, the better. As we finalized our strategy, I received a text from Emma. Mom, have you seen this? Dad's being interviewed about the company's bold new direction. Attached was a link to a financial news site. The article featured a photo of Robert and Melanie, standing together at what appeared to be a recent industry event. The headline read, Morgan & Reynolds, CEO, announces strategic partnership to fuel expansion. In the interview, Robert spoke confidently about the company's robust financial position and plans for aggressive growth through strategic capital partnerships. There was no mention of the cash flow crisis or the Pinnacle deal's true terms. More tellingly, there was no mention of me or my ongoing ownership stake in the company. I passed my phone around the table. He's controlling the narrative, putting a positive spin on the Pinnacle deal before anyone can question it. Classic misdirection, Taylor muttered. The financial press rarely digs beyond the CEO's statement, especially for a private company, like Morgan & Reynolds. We can use this, Garrett said, studying the article. If he's publicly committed to this rosy picture, he'll have difficulty explaining to the board why they need to rush the Pinnacle vote due to financial distress. Unless he's telling the board a different story than he's telling the press, Valerie pointed out, which would constitute material misrepresentation, Eliza said, her expression hardening. Something the SEC tends to take seriously, especially when it affects investment decisions. A plan was taking shape in my mind. What if we leaked the real numbers to the financial press? Anonymous source close to the company, concerned about discrepancies between public statements and internal projections? Garrett looked thoughtful. Risky. Could backfire if traced to us. But effective, Taylor countered. I still have contacts at several financial news outlets who would run with this, especially if given actual documentation. No, Eliza said firmly. Leaking internal financial data crosses a legal line we don't want to approach. But there's another way to use the press. She outlined an alternative. Montgomery Ventures would issue a press release announcing interest in mid-sized financial services companies in New England, specifically those with strong fundamentals but cash flow challenges. Not naming Morgan and Reynolds directly, but using language that financial analysts would immediately connect to the company. It creates market speculation without revealing our specific plans, Eliza explained. Robert will recognize it as a potential threat, but won't know exactly what we're planning or how far along we are. It might make him nervous enough to make a mistake, I agreed, or accelerate his timeline even further, Garrett cautioned. Either way, it changes the dynamic, Eliza concluded. Right now, he thinks he's in complete control. We need to introduce uncertainty. After the meeting, I drove to Diane Wilcox's home in West Hartford. I'd called ahead, saying I needed her guidance on a charitable initiative, plausible given our history of collaboration on such projects. Diane welcomed me warmly into her elegant living room, offering tea and clearly expecting a casual social visit. Catherine, it's lovely to see you, she said as we settled onto her antique sofa. Though I must say, I was surprised by your call, with everything you must be going through. That's actually why I'm here, Diane, I said gently. Not just the divorce, but concerns about Morgan & Reynolds. Her expression shifted subtly. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to discuss board matters with you, Catherine, especially now. I understand your position, I assured her, but I'm not here as Robert's soon-to-be ex-wife. I'm here as a significant shareholder with fiduciary concerns about a major company decision. Diane set down her teacup. You're referring to the Pinnacle Partners deal. I am, I confirmed, and I'm concerned that the board may not have been given complete information about the company's financial situation or the full implications of the deal terms. Robert has been very transparent with the board, Diane said, but her tone lacked conviction. I reached into my bag and withdrew a single sheet of paper, a summary of the company's cash flow projections for the next 6 months, highlighting the dramatic shortfall that would occur without additional capital. "Has the board seen these numbers?" I asked, sliding the paper across the coffee table. Diane studied the document, her expression growing troubled. "These projections are significantly worse than what was presented at our last meeting." "I thought they might be," I said quietly. "Diane, I know you take your responsibilities as a board member seriously. That's why I'm coming to you directly. There's an alternative proposal that would provide the needed capital without ceding control to Pinnacle Partners." Diane looked up sharply. "What alternative proposal?" "A group of investors led by Montgomery Ventures is prepared to inject $30 million in exchange for a minority stake and board representation. No change in management control, no asset stripping, no mass layoffs, all of which are explicitly permitted in the fine print of the Pinnacle Agreement." "Eliza Montgomery is involved in this?" Diane asked, clearly impressed. I nodded. "She sees potential in Morgan and Reynolds that Pinnacle doesn't, particularly in serving female clients and developing innovative wealth management approaches." Diane was silent for several moments, processing this information. Finally, she asked, "What exactly are you asking of me, Catherine?" "Simply to keep an open mind at Friday's board meeting, to ask questions about the Pinnacle deal's terms, and to consider all alternatives before voting," I replied. "James Chen will be introducing our proposal formally." "James is supporting this?" "He's reviewed the financials and our alternative proposal. He believes the board should consider all options." Diane nodded slowly. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Catherine. I can't promise how I'll vote, but I can promise I'll ensure the board's due diligence is thorough." As I was leaving, Diane touched my arm. "Catherine, for what it's worth, I always thought you got shortchanged in that company. You built it alongside Robert, then got pushed aside once it was successful. Many of us noticed." Her words stayed with me as I drove home, bolstering my resolve. Perhaps I wasn't as invisible as Robert had wanted me to believe. Perhaps there were more people who recognized my contributions than I had realized. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. It was Garrett, his voice tense. "Robert's called another emergency executive session for tomorrow morning," he said without preamble, "before the full board meeting on Friday." "What for?" I asked, alarm rising. "According to my source, he's going to ask for approval to buy out the family trust's shares, claiming it's necessary to stabilize leadership during a critical transition. Period. Can he do that without my consent as co-trustee?" "Not normally," Garrett replied grimly. "But he's prepared to argue that your actions constitute a breach of trustee duty, which would give the board grounds to remove you as trustee." "On what basis?" "He's claiming you've been sharing confidential company information with outside parties, specifically with Montgomery Ventures." I gripped the phone tighter. How could he know about that connection? "I don't know," Garrett admitted. "But it means we need to move now, not Friday. Whatever we're going to do, it has to happen before that executive session." "What are our options?" I asked, my mind racing. "Limited and risky," he said honestly. "But Eliza and I have an idea. How quickly can you get to my office?" "We need to move up our timeline," Garrett said as I entered the Wilson Capital conference room. Significantly. It was nearly 9 p.m., but Eliza Montgomery, Taylor Novak, and Valerie Chen were all present, along with Diana and a serious-looking man I didn't recognize. "Catherine, this is Benjamin Trask," Garrett introduced us. "He's our securities counsel." Benjamin nodded. "Ms. Morgan, I've been briefed on your situation. We have limited options, but they're viable if we act quickly. The executive session is scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow," Eliza said, getting straight to business. We've confirmed through James Chen that Robert intends to push through a resolution allowing the company to purchase your trust's shares, effectively eliminating your ownership stake. How can he do that without my consent as co-trustee? I asked. He can't, under normal circumstances, Benjamin explained. But he's prepared to argue that you've breached your fiduciary duty as trustee by working with outside investors, us, to influence company decisions for personal gain. That's ridiculous, I protested. I'm trying to protect the company from his poor management decisions. We know that, Benjamin said calmly. But it creates enough legal ambiguity for him to potentially freeze your voting rights while the matter is litigated. By then, the Pinnacle deal would be approved and your shares would be massively diluted. So, what's our countermove? I asked, looking around the table. Eliza leaned forward. We purchase controlling interest in Morgan & Reynolds before the executive session tomorrow morning. I stared at her. How is that possible? The majority of shares aren't for sale. Most aren't, Garrett agreed. But we've identified a block that is, or rather will be, with the right incentive. Taylor pulled up a document on his tablet and slid it across the table to me. It was a confidential offering memo from an investment bank, dated just 3 days earlier. The memo outlined terms for a private sale of Morgan & Reynolds shares representing 22% of the company. Whose shares are these? I asked, scanning the document. Robert's, Taylor said with grim satisfaction. He's been quietly shopping his personal stake to raise cash. I looked up, stunned. He's selling his own shares while pushing the Pinnacle. Deal? Classic Robert, Taylor said. Securing his own golden parachute while telling everyone else to double down on the company. The offering is confidential, limited to pre-approved buyers. He doesn't want the board to know he's reducing his own stake while encouraging them to dilute theirs. How did you get this? I asked. I still have friends at the company, Taylor replied. One of them tipped me off. The shares are being offered. At a steep discount, Robert needs cash quickly to finalize his divorce and start his new life with Melanie. If we can secure those shares, Eliza continued, combined with your 15% through the trust, we'll control 37% of the company. Not a majority, but enough to block the Pinnacle deal and force consideration of our alternative proposal. The offering expires tomorrow at noon, Benjamin noted. After the executive session, Robert clearly timed it that way to ensure the Pinnacle path was secured before he reduced his stake. So we need to preempt the offer, I said, understanding the strategy. Make an irrefusable bid before the executive session. Exactly, Garrett confirmed. Montgomery Ventures and Wilson Capital are prepared to make a direct offer tonight. 20% above Robert's asking price. All cash, immediate closing. But there's a catch. There always is, I said. The offering states that Robert has right of refusal for any buyer not pre-approved. He would almost certainly refuse to sell to us directly, especially now that he suspects our involvement with you. So we need a proxy, I concluded. Someone Robert wouldn't suspect. Eliza nodded. Someone he might even be eager to sell to. Plan was beginning to form in my mind. Someone like his future father-in-law. All eyes turned to me. Melanie's father, I explained. Victor Parker. He's an investor in commercial real estate. Robert's been trying to impress him ever since their relationship began. If Victor expressed interest in buying into Morgan & Reynolds, Robert would jump at the chance to cement that relationship, Garrett finished, his expression brightening. That could work, but we'd need Victor's cooperation. And why would he help us? Diana asked the obvious question. I smiled. Because Victor Parker and I share something important, a low opinion of Robert Reynolds. I explained that I'd met Victor at several charity events over the years. Unlike his daughter, who had always been politely distant, Victor had been frankly warm toward me. At last year's hospital fundraiser, after a few drinks, he had confided that he thought Robert wasn't good enough for Melanie and questioned his business acumen. Victor's old school, I said. He built his real estate empire from nothing and views Robert as a polished pretender. He's only tolerating their relationship because Melanie is determined to marry him. Would he actively work against his daughter's fiancé? Eliza asked skeptically. He wouldn't see it that way, I replied. He'd see it as protecting his daughter's future interests by ensuring the company she's tying herself to is properly managed. Plus, if the deal is financially advantageous for him, it's worth a call, Garrett decided. Do you have his number? I did in my charity committee contacts. As the others worked on drafting the offer terms, I stepped into a private office to make the call. Victor answered on the third ring, his gruff voice immediately recognizable. Catherine Morgan, he said after I identified myself, wasn't expecting to hear from you. How are you holding up with all this unpleasantness? I'm doing better than expected, Victor. In fact, I'm calling with a business proposition that might interest you. There was a pause. Business proposition? That's not what I was expecting. Life is full of surprises, I said. Do you have a few minutes to discuss an investment opportunity, one that involves Morgan and Reynolds? His interest was immediately piqued. I'm listening. I laid out the bare bones of the situation. Robert was quietly selling a significant block of shares at a discount. I knew investors who were willing to pay a premium for those shares, but needed a proxy buyer Robert would accept. The investment would be risk-free for Victor. All funds would come from my investors, and the shares would be transferred to them immediately after purchase. What's in it for me? Victor asked bluntly. 2 things, I replied. First, a finder's fee of 5% of the purchase price, approximately $3 million for making a few phone calls and signing some papers. Second, the satisfaction of ensuring your daughter's future husband isn't making dangerous financial decisions that could affect her security. Victor was silent for a long moment. Robert told Melanie the company's in excellent shape. He's been talking about the Pinnacle deal like it's the coup of the century. Has he mentioned that he's selling his own shares at a steep discount, or that the company is facing a cash crisis within 90 days? Another silence, longer this time. No, he hasn't. Victor's tone had hardened. What exactly would I need to do? Call Robert tonight. Tell him you've heard through your business network that he might be offering shares and you're interested in investing. The timing is critical. This needs to happen before 8 a.m. tomorrow. And if he asks how I heard about the offering, say a friend at First Boston mentioned it. They're handling the sale. Victor sighed heavily. Catherine, I've always liked you. Thought Robert was a fool for how he treated you. But Melanie's my daughter. She loves this man. God knows why. I understand your loyalty to Melanie, I said sincerely. This isn't about hurting her. It's about ensuring the company she's becoming part of has a sound future. If Robert's making backroom deals while pushing the Pinnacle partnership publicly, she deserves to know, doesn't she? That seemed to resonate. After a few more minutes of discussion, Victor agreed. Send me the details, he said. If what you're saying is true, I'll make the call. Not just for the fee, though that's certainly appreciated, but because I don't like being lied to, even indirectly. When I returned to the conference room, the team was finalizing the offer document. Victor's in, I announced. He'll call Robert tonight about purchasing the shares. Eliza looked impressed. Well done. Now we wait. But the waiting didn't last long. Less than 30 minutes later, Victor called back. Robert jumped at it, he reported, a note of surprise in his voice. Didn't even negotiate when I offered 10% above his asking price. Said we could close first thing tomorrow morning. His lawyers are drawing up the paperwork now. Did he ask how you knew about the offering? He did. I used the First Boston line you suggested. He seemed relieved, actually. Said he'd been worried about finding the right buyer, someone he could trust to maintain his vision for the company. Victor's tone was bitter. All while planning to dump his shares and run, apparently. Thank you, Victor, I said sincerely. This means more than you know. After ending the call, I looked around the table at my team. It's happening. Roberts agreed to sell to Victor. Now for phase 2, Garrett said. We need to prepare for the transfer of shares from Victor to our investment group immediately after his purchase closes. And we need to be ready for Robert's reaction when he realizes what's happened, Diana added. He won't take this lying down. Speaking of reactions, I said, what about Melanie? Once her father purchases the shares, she'll know he's involved. Victor. We'll need to manage that, Eliza said pragmatically. Though if she's as ambitious as you've described, she might appreciate her father securing a larger stake in her future husband's company. Benjamin was already drafting the transfer documents. We'll need to move quickly once Victor's purchase closes. The executive session is scheduled for 8 a.m., and we need to have legal control of those shares before then. Which means we need to close Victor's purchase by 7 a.m. at the latest, Garrett noted. That's going to be tight. Robert will make it happen, I said with certainty. He wants that cash before the executive session. He doesn't want to face questions about why he's selling his own shares while pushing the Pinnacle deal. As the team continued working on logistics for the morning, I stepped away again to call Emma and Michael. They deserved to know what was happening before it all exploded publicly. Emma answered immediately. Mom, is everything okay? It's late. Everything's fine, I assured her. Better than fine, actually. But I wanted you both to know that things are about to get complicated with your father's company. By this time tomorrow, I'll effectively be one of the largest shareholders in Morgan & Reynolds. There was a stunned silence. Then Michael's voice came on the line. Emma had apparently put me on speaker. Mom, what exactly are you doing? I explained the situation as simply as I could, emphasizing that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about preserving a company that had been part of our family for decades and ensuring it was properly managed going forward. When I finished, there was another silence. Dad's going to lose his mind, Emma finally said. Probably, I agreed. But he created this situation. I'm just refusing to be sidelined the way he planned. I wish I could see his face when he realizes what's happened, Michael said, a note of admiration in his voice. All those times he told me that women don't understand high finance. You've outmaneuvered him completely. Not yet, I cautioned. There's still a lot that could go wrong. I just wanted you both to be prepared for whatever happens tomorrow. We're with you, Mom, Emma said firmly. 100%. After ending the call, I rejoined the team to finalize preparations for the morning. It would be a sleepless night, but 30 years of being underestimated had prepared me for this moment. By dawn, we would either have secured controlling interest in Morgan & Reynolds, or Robert would have found a way to block our plan. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. For the company, for Robert, or for me. Dawn broke over Hartford as our team gathered in the Morgan & Reynolds building. By 6:30 a.m., we had set up in an empty conference room on the floor below the BO executive boardroom, a space Garrett had arranged through a friendly property manager. Diana and Benjamin were monitoring the closing of Victor's purchase, while Eliza reviewed our presentation for the board. My phone buzzed with a text from Victor. Closing papers signed, transfer complete. He doesn't suspect a thing. I showed the I message to Benjamin, who immediately initiated the share transfer. We'll have legal control within 20 minutes, he confirmed, well before the executive session. At 7:15 a.m., James Chen texted that board members were beginning to arrive. Robert had scheduled breakfast before the formal meeting, likely hoping to secure commitments for his proposal in a more relaxed setting. Perfect timing, Garrett said, checking his watch. The share transfer will be registered before they even pour the coffee. At 7:30, Benjamin received confirmation from the transfer agent. It's done, he announced. The Montgomery Wilson Investment Group now controls 22% of Morgan & Reynolds' shares. Combined with the trust's 15%, we have effective blocking power for any major company decision. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Now we wait for Robert to be informed. We didn't have to wait long. At 7:45, raised voices could be heard from the boardroom above. A minute later, my phone rang. Robert's name flashed on the screen. I put the phone on speaker. "Good morning, Robert." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice tight with fury. Victor just informed the board that he transferred his shares to Montgomery Ventures and Wilson Capital. This has your fingerprints all over it. "I'm protecting my interests in a company I helped build," I replied calmly. "Something you should have considered before trying to push me out." "This is corporate sabotage," he hissed. "I'll have you and your investors tied up in litigation for years." "That would be unwise," I said, "especially given the questionable financial representations you've made to the board and potential investors. The SEC tends to take a dim view of such discrepancies." There was a moment of silence. When Robert spoke again, his voice had shifted from rage to calculated negotiation. "What do you want, Catherine?" "I want the board to hear all options before voting on the company's future," I said. "My investors and I will be presenting an alternative to the Pinnacle deal in 10 minutes. I suggest you prepare the board to receive us." Another pause. "And if I refuse? Then we'll call for an emergency shareholder vote to reconstitute the board," I said. "With our combined shares and the support we've already secured from other shareholders, we have the votes to succeed. But I'd prefer a more collegial approach." Robert swore under his breath. "Fine. 10 minutes. He hung up abruptly. Eliza raised an eyebrow. He folded quickly. "He's regrouping, not surrendering," I cautioned. "Robert never gives up control without a fight." At precisely 8 a.m., we ascended to the executive boardroom. The tension was palpable as we entered. 9 board members sat around the gleaming mahogany table with Robert at its head. Melanie sat to his right, her expression a mixture of shock and anger. Victor was conspicuously absent. "Ms. Montgomery, Mr. Wilson," Robert said with forced courtesy. "The board has agreed to hear your proposal before proceeding with our scheduled agenda." I noted the careful exclusion of my name. I was still just the soon-to-be ex-wife, not a legitimate business presence in his eyes, despite the fact that I now controlled more of the company than he did. "Thank you, Robert," I said, taking an empty seat directly across from him. "But first, I think we should clarify my role here. I'm not just accompanying Ms. Montgomery and Mr. Wilson. I'm their partner and a significant shareholder in Morgan & Reynolds." Robert's jaw tightened, but James Chen intervened before he could respond. "Catherine, perhaps you could explain to the board exactly what has transpired in the last 24 hours. I did so succinctly, outlining how our investment group had acquired Robert's personal shares through Victor Parker and how, combined with my trust's holdings, we now controlled 37% of the company. I explained our concerns about the Pinnacle deal and presented our alternative: a $30 million capital injection that would stabilize the company without ceding control to outside interests. As I spoke, I watched the board members' reactions. Patricia, Hammond and Jeffrey Nelson exchanged concerned glances. Diane Wilcox nodded slightly at several of my points. Thomas Ford and William Patterson, Robert's most loyal allies, looked stunned. Gerald Mackenzie seemed more intrigued than alarmed. Melanie stared fixedly at the table, her knuckles white where she gripped a pen. When I finished, Robert immediately went on the offensive. "This is a hostile takeover attempt disguised as a rescue," he declared. "Ms. Montgomery and Mr. Wilson have no experience in our industry and are clearly being manipulated by my estranged wife, who is using company matters to advance her position in our divorce proceedings." Eliza leaned forward. "That's not accurate, Mr. Reynolds. Montgomery Ventures specializes in financial services investments. We've reviewed Morgan & Reynolds' operations extensively and see significant untapped potential, particularly in serving female clients, a growing market segment that your company has historically underserved. And let's be clear about the timeline," Garrett added. Catherine approached us after discovering that you were pushing forward with a deal that would effectively dilute all current shareholders, including her trust, while secretly selling your own shares at a discount. Robert flushed. That's a gross mischaracterization. Is it? James Chen interrupted, sliding copies of the offering memo across the table. This document clearly shows you were selling your personal shares while advocating for a deal that would diminish the value of everyone else's holdings. The boardroom fell silent as the members reviewed the memo. Why wasn't the board informed? Of this? Patricia Hammond asked, her voice sharp with disapproval. It was a personal financial decision, Robert said stiffly, unrelated to company operations. Unrelated? Jeffrey Nelson echoed incredulously. You're the CEO and chairman. Your personal stake in this company is absolutely relevant to board decisions, especially when you're asking us to approve a major restructuring. Robert attempted to redirect. The Pinnacle deal is still our best option for immediate capital needs. The Pinnacle deal gives them effective control for a fraction of the company's true value, I cut in. Our proposal provides the same capital infusion without the onerous terms hidden in the agreement's fine print. Diane Wilcox turned to Eliza. What exactly would Montgomery Ventures expect in return for this investment? A board seat and a partnership to develop financial products specifically for female clients, Eliza replied. No management changes, no asset stripping, no mass layoffs, all of which are explicitly permitted under the Pinnacle agreement. Robert made one last attempt to regain control. This is all happening too quickly. We should postpone any decision until we've had time to properly evaluate these new circumstances. The cash flow crisis you've been concealing doesn't allow for postponement, I pointed out. By your own projections, the company needs this capital within the next 30 days. James Chen nodded. Catherine is right. We need to decide today. Patricia Hammond, ever practical, cut to the heart of the matter. I move that we formally reject the Pinnacle Partners' proposal and hold an immediate vote on the Montgomery Wilson alternative. Jeffrey Nelson seconded the motion, and Robert had no choice but to call for a vote. The result was decisive. 7. In favor of our proposal, 2 against, Robert and Melanie being the only dissenters. As the meeting adjourned, Robert remained seated, staring at the table as the other board members filed out. Melanie lingered uncertainly beside him. When only the 4 of us remained, Robert, Melanie, Eliza, and me, I finally allowed myself to say what I'd been holding back. You know, Robert, all of this could have been avoided if you'd just respected me as a partner, in our marriage and in this company. I never wanted your power. I just wanted acknowledgement of my contributions and a seat at the table I helped build. He looked up, his expression a complex mixture of anger, humiliation, and something that might have been regret. Is that what this was all about? Recognition? Partly, I admitted. But mostly it was about refusing to be discarded after 30 years of building something together, both our marriage and this company. You thought I was too simple, too traditional to fight back. That was your mistake. Melanie suddenly pushed back from the table. I need to find my father, she said tightly, avoiding Robert's gaze. Apparently we have some things to discuss. After she left, Eliza tactfully excused herself, leaving Robert and me alone in the boardroom. What happens now? He asked, sounding tired for the first time since I'd known him. That depends on you, I said. As CEO, you can work with our investment group to implement the changes needed to stabilize the company, or you can resign. Either way, I'll be taking a seat on the board as the trust's representative. He shook his head slowly. You planned all of this perfectly, didn't you? Right down to using Victor as your proxy buyer. I learned from watching you all these years, I replied. You always said business was about seeing opportunities others missed and having the courage to seize them. I finally took that lesson to heart. As I gathered my papers to leave, Robert spoke again. The divorce. What do you want to do about that? I paused at the door. The divorce will proceed, Robert. Some things can't be rebuilt once they're broken, but the settlement terms will need to be significantly revised, given the change in circumstances. He nodded, accepting the inevitable. For what it's worth, I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. No, I agreed. You won't. 6 months later, I sat in my new office at Morgan & Reynolds, reviewing quarterly projections with our CFO. The company had stabilized under the new leadership structure. Robert had chosen to stay on as CEO, working under the watchful eye of a more engaged board that now included me, Eliza, and Garrett. Melanie had resigned both her executive position and her board seat. Her engagement to Robert quietly ended after the revelations about his financial maneuvering. Emma and Michael had initially been concerned about my continued involvement with their father's company, but they'd come to respect my decision to reclaim what I'd helped build. "Are you sure you want to keep working with him?" Emma had asked during a recent visit. "After everything he did?" "This isn't about Robert anymore," I'd explained. "It's about creating something meaningful from all those years I invested. And frankly, it's about showing other women that it's never too late to reclaim your power." As I looked out my office window at the Hartford skyline, I reflected on how much had changed in the past year. I'd gone from being Robert's wife to a respected board member and shareholder with a voting bloc that could influence major company decisions. The divorce had been finalized with terms that reflected my true contribution to our joint success. I'd purchased a new home, smaller than our old house but entirely mine. Most importantly, I'd discovered capabilities I never knew I possessed: resilience, strategic thinking, and leadership that had always been there but never fully expressed. My assistant interrupted my thoughts. "Ms. Morgan, the Women in Finance luncheon starts in 30 minutes. Your keynote speech is scheduled for 1:15. I smiled, gathering my notes. The speech was titled, "It's Never Too Late, Reclaiming Your Seat at the Table," and it would be my first public address since taking my position at Morgan & Reynolds. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Knock 'em dead, Mom. So proud of you." I stepped outside into the bright spring sunshine, no longer walking in anyone's shadow, least of all Robert's. After 30 years of building someone else's dream, I had finally created my own, and it turned out to be far more satisfying than revenge. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.